Florist gifted roses to a lonely billionaire CEO. His next bouquet? A proposal wrapped in a private jet. The private jet's engines make a low humming sound as Leo grips the armrests tight. His hands turn white against the soft leather seats. He breathes fast and shallow. Next to him sits a beautiful arrangement of colorful flowers, carefully put together to tell a special story. A small velvet box peeks out from his jacket pocket. A friendly flight attendant walks over to him. "Sir, are you sure you want to propose 30,000 feet in the air when you can barely breathe?" Leo looks up with sweat on his forehead. "She's worth facing every fear I have." The whole cabin is filled with flowers. Beautiful arrangements turn the plane jet into a garden in the sky. Every flower has a special meaning. Every color reminds him of a moment they shared. The pilot's voice comes through the speakers. "Everyone, we're hitting some unexpected turbulence. Please stay in your seats." Leo closes his eyes and holds the ring box tighter. How did a simple flower shop owner end up here, about to ask one of the richest women in the country to marry him? 3 months earlier. Want to know what happened next? Stay with us, and please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and comment where you're watching from. Leo Martinez adjusted the baby's breath around a cluster of pink peonies, stepping back to examine his work. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Petal Poetry, his small flower shop tucked between a busy coffee place and a vintage bookstore. The morning light caught on the water droplets, making the arrangement sparkle. "Perfect for a first date," he murmured, adding a single sprig of lavender. Hopeful but not overwhelming. The bell above the door jingled as a nervous young man entered. Leo looked up and smiled. This had to be Marcus, who'd called earlier about a first date arrangement. "How did you know?" Marcus asked, staring at the arrangement. "That's exactly right, not too much, but special." Leo shrugged. "The flowers tell me what each person needs. You sounded excited but worried on the phone. Peonies mean good fortune and happy marriage, but that's our secret." He winked. "Your date just needs to know they're beautiful." After Marcus left, clutching the flowers like treasure, Leo opened the mail he'd been avoiding. His smile faded as he read the bank notice. Third warning. He had 30 days before they started foreclosure proceedings. "You're making that face again," said Zoe, pushing through the curtain from the back room. Her arms were full of fresh stock. She was younger than Leo by 10 years, with bright blue hair and endless optimism. The "I'm a starving artist who'll die alone" face. "I'm not starving," Leo replied, tucking the notice into his pocket. "I had a muffin earlier." "And you're not dying alone either," Zoe said, arranging sunflowers in a bucket. "Not when you speak the language of love through flowers better than most people speak actual languages." The afternoon brought a steady trickle of customers, a grandmother buying birthday lilies, a husband picking up his weekly anniversary bouquet, a teenage boy spending his allowance on a single rose. Leo treated each arrangement like a personal message. For the grandmother, vibrant stems that spoke of celebration and family bonds. For the devoted husband, soft blooms that whispered of lasting love. For the nervous teenager, a perfect first love rose with the thorns carefully removed. "You should charge more," Zoe said after the teenage boy left. "That rose took you 15 minutes to select." "He's 16 and saving for college," Leo replied. "The right flower matters more than profit." "Noble, but nobility doesn't pay rent." She pointed to his pocket where the bank notice sat. "How bad is it?" "Or a wealthy spouse," Zoe teased. someone who appreciates art and beauty. Sure, I'll just put out an ad. Broke florist seeks rich patron. Payment in poetic arrangements. As evening approached, Leo worked on a special project, a complex arrangement with rare orchids and imported roses. No customer had ordered it. These creations were his true passion telling stories through flowers that words couldn't express. "Who's that for?" Zoe asked, preparing to leave. "No one. Everyone." Leo gently positioned a delicate blue flower. "It's what I'd make if money didn't matter." After Zoe left, Leo stood alone in his shop, surrounded by beauty he'd created but might soon lose. Outside, expensive cars rushed past, carrying people who might spend on one business dinner what could save his dream. The phone rang. An urgent order from downtown. Someone needed flowers for an important meeting immediately. Leo hesitated, looking at his unfinished masterpiece. Then he reached for his delivery van keys. The downtown skyline gleamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as Vivian Chen paced the length of the conference room. 40 stories up, the world looked small and orderly, just how she liked it. "The Tokyo acquisition closes Friday," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "I want the transition to be seamless." Around the polished table, board members nodded. Some took notes. Others simply watched her with a mixture of admiration and unease. "Miss Chen," said Warren, the oldest board member, "perhaps we should reconsider the timeline. The Japanese partners might appreciate it more traditional approach." Vivian stopped pacing. The room fell silent. The Chen Hotel Group didn't become global by waiting for permission to succeed, she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The Tanaka family reached out to us, not our competitors, because they respect decisiveness." She pulled up a chart on the wall screen showing projections. First quarter profits up. For the next hour, Vivian led the meeting with precision. Numbers, strategies, contingency plans. She addressed each point without hesitation. When it ended, board members filed out with renewed confidence in their CEO. Only her assistant, Rebecca, remained behind. "Impressive as always," Rebecca said, collecting empty water glasses. "Oh, I nearly forgot the investors from Singapore arrive at 3. Their team specifically mentioned they appreciate environments that reflect attention to detail." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning the last time they visited a potential partner, they walked out because the conference room looked, quote, sterile and uninspiring. They're traditional that way." "We're a hotel group, not an art gallery," Vivian sighed. "But fine. Make sure the presentation materials are perfect and we need impressive florals," Rebecca finished. "The arrangements from last month's charity event are, well..." After Rebecca left, Vivian walked to her office. The space was immaculate awards lining one wall, a desk of dark wood, and modern furniture in cool greys and blues. Perfect, professional, and utterly impersonal. In the corner stood a large vase containing what had once been an elaborate arrangement. Now the flowers dropped, petals scattered on the glass side table. Vivian found herself touching a withered rose. Its once vibrant red faded to a dull crimson. She'd received dozens of arrangements over the years, gifts from partners, clients, employees, all professionally selected, perfectly appropriate, and completely forgettable. She couldn't remember the last time flowers had made her pause. With a sudden frown, she pulled her hand back and pressed the intercom. "Rebecca, find a florist, someone who can deliver something different for the Singapore meeting. Premium quality. I don't care which shop. as long as they can deliver immediately. Sitting at her desk, Vivian opened her laptop. 300 unread emails awaited her response. Meetings filled her calendar back-to-back until 9 that evening. Another dinner alone in her penthouse would follow. She glanced at the dying flowers once more before turning away. Success had built walls around her, walls she herself had carefully constructed. They kept her safe.
Professional.
Respected. If sometimes those walls felt like a prison well, that was the price of reaching the top. Her phone rang. Rebecca's voice came through. "I found a place called Petal Poetry. The owner can deliver within the hour." "Fine," Vivian said. "Just make sure they understand this needs to impress." She ended the call and turned back to her work, unaware that her ordered world was about to change. Leo juggled 3 massive arrangements as he hurried through the revolving door of Chen Tower. The gleaming lobby, all marble and steel, made his worn delivery van parked outside look even more out of place. He approached the security desk, flowers partially blocking his view. "Delivery for the Singapore investors meeting," he said, peeking around a cascade of orchids. The security guard looked him up and down, taking in his faded jeans and the dirt under his fingernails from repotting earlier. "ID and delivery confirmation?" Leo carefully balanced the flowers on the counter and fumbled for his wallet. "It's an emergency order directly from Ms. Chen's office. They called less than an hour ago." "Anyone can claim that," the guard said, examining Leo's driver's license with exaggerated scrutiny. "There's no delivery on the schedule." Leo's phone buzzed in his pocket. The bank, probably. Another reminder about his overdue loan. He didn't have time for this. "Look, call Rebecca from Ms. Chen's office. She ordered these specifically." The standoff might have continued if Rebecca herself hadn't emerged from the elevator, phone to ear. She spotted Leo and the flowers, eyes widening with relief. "Thank goodness," she said, ending her call. "The investors moved up their arrival. These are perfect." She nodded to the guard. "He's with me, Carlos." 10 minutes later, Leo stood in an imposing conference room, carefully arranging his creations. He'd chosen bold orchids paired with delicate local blooms, a blend of exotic and familiar that spoke of global reach with hometown values. Exactly what a hotel group should project. "The fuchsia orchid needs to angle more toward the window," he muttered to himself, absorbed in his work. "Catch the light better." "You're right," said a voice behind him. "The light transforms it." Leo turned to find a woman in a tailored charcoal suit watching him from the doorway. Something about her posture, straight-backed, but not rigid, suggested natural authority. "Ms. Chen," he said, recognizing her from magazine covers. "I didn't realize you were there." "Few do," she replied with the faintest smile. "That's often useful." She approached the arrangement, studying it. "Cymbidium orchids for the centerpiece. Bold choice." Leo blinked in surprise. "You know about orchid varieties?" "I grew up with a grandmother who spoke to plants more than people." Vivian touched a petal gently. She said cymbidiums represent respected friendship, appropriate for investors, don't you think? For a moment, Leo forgot he was standing in a corporate headquarters with one of the country's wealthiest CEOs. "Exactly, and I've included these white peonies for prosperity and the hydrangeas for understanding and heartfelt emotion," Vivian finished. Their eyes met briefly. Something shifted in the air between them. Recognition, perhaps. The moment broke when Rebecca hurried in. "Ms. Chen, the investors are in the lobby." "Thank you for the rush job," Vivian said, professional mask sliding back into place. "Rebecca will handle payment." As they left, Leo noticed a small crystal vase on a side table, empty. Without thinking, he took one perfect white rose from his supply bag and placed it in the vase. On his notepad he quickly wrote, "For after they leave, white roses mean new beginnings. Leo from Petal Poetry." He left quietly, just another vendor finishing a job. 3 hours later, after the investors departed, Vivian returned to the conference room alone. The meeting had gone perfectly. The Singapore group was impressed not just by her presentation, but by what they called thoughtful environmental details. Her eyes found the single white rose she hadn't noticed before. She picked up the note beside it, reading it once, twice. Her fingers traced the handwritten words. For the briefest moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps vulnerability. Then, with a quick glance to ensure no one was watching, she slipped the note into her jacket pocket and lifted the rose to her face, inhaling deeply. Back at his shop, Leo closed up for the day. The corporate delivery had paid well enough to buy him another week before facing the bank. He'd likely never see the inside of Chen Tower again. But at least the flowers had been appreciated. "How did it go?" Zoe asked, watering the last plants. "Fine," Leo shrugged. "Just another corporate job." Neither Leo nor Vivian realized that the white rose was just the beginning. The order came in by email the day after the Singapore meeting. "Ms. Chen requests your services for her personal office. Weekly arrangements, premium selection." Leo read it twice, wondering if Rebecca had simply been impressed with his work for the investors. But the note continued. Ms. Chen specifically requested white roses be incorporated into each arrangement. "Looks like you made an impression on someone important," Zoe said, peering over his shoulder. "Chen, as in Chen Hotels? Vivian Chen?" Leo nodded, already mentally composing the first arrangement. "White roses for new beginnings," he murmured. The next morning he delivered the flowers himself, white roses complemented by delicate blue forget-me-nots and sprigs of rosemary. Tucked into the arrangement was a small card, white roses for new beginnings, forget-me-nots for true remembrance, rosemary for remembrance. Some conversations, however brief, deserved to be remembered. Leo. What began as a weekly order soon became twice weekly. Each time, Rebecca's requests grew more specific. Ms. Chen wondered if you could incorporate something that represents strength without aggression. Or something suitable for a difficult negotiation day. With each arrangement, Leo responded not just with flowers, but with meaning. For strength, he chose oak leaves among soft pink peonies, power balanced with compassion. For negotiations, lavender for distrust, but also yellow tulips for hopeful outcomes. And with each delivery, a note explaining his choices. At Petal Poetry, business continued as usual. The bank granted an extension after seeing the Chen Hotel's account on Leo's books. But Leo's mind often wandered to the mysterious CEO who seemed to speak his language of flowers. "You're obsessing," Zoe told him after catching him researching rare Japanese blooms at midnight. "She's just another client." "She's the only client who's ever asked for flowers that represent the beauty in imperfection," Leo replied. "Do you know how rare that is?" 3 weeks into their strange correspondence, Leo noticed changes in the Chen Tower executive floor. The first time, a security guard called him by name. Then Rebecca started having him place the arrangements himself. "Ms. Chen insists you have the eye for proper positioning." He never saw Vivian herself, though sometimes he felt a presence watching from just beyond a doorway, until Thursday night, when the shop bell rang long after closing time. Leo looked up from his work table, hands deep in an elaborate arrangement built around rare blue roses. Blue roses that had been specially requested for tomorrow's delivery to Chen Tower. Vivian Chen stood in his shop, dressed not in her usual business attire but in simple dark jeans and a grey cashmere sweater. Without her boardroom power stance, she seemed both more approachable and somehow more real. "You're making my arrangement," she said softly. Leo didn't try to hide his work. Blue roses, nearly impossible to grow naturally. They represent the unattainable. You wrote that they also mean achieving the impossible. She stepped closer, examining his careful work. Which meaning did you intend? Both. Leo met her eyes directly. Depends on who's looking at them. Vivian touched a petal gently. I've had countless designers create spaces for me, millions spent on perfect environments. None of them understood what you do with a handful of flowers and a few written words. Flowers say what we're afraid to put into language, Leo replied. That's why I love them. They're honest in ways people rarely are. Vivian picked up one of his cards from previous arrangements. Is that why you write the meanings? To translate. I write them because meaning matters, Leo said. Beauty without meaning is just decoration. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, the shop breathed with living things, hundreds of blooms, each telling their own story. I have dinner, Vivian finally said, with people who'll discuss investments and acquisitions for 3 hours without once saying anything meaningful. Leo nodded. And I have to finish this arrangement for a CEO who understands the difference between looking at beauty and actually seeing it. Vivian smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. I'll look forward to receiving it tomorrow. As she turned to leave, Leo asked, Why blue roses, of all the flowers you could have requested? At the door she paused. Because some things seem impossible until someone dares to create them. After she left, Leo worked into the night, crafting something worthy of that understanding. Rebecca placed a thick folder on Leo's counter one Tuesday morning. The shop had just opened, and he was still arranging the day's fresh stock. What's this? Leo asked, wiping his hands on his apron. A business proposition, Rebecca replied. Ms. Chen would like to meet with you today at 2 p.m. to discuss it personally. Inside the folder, Leo found professional photos of hotel lobbies, restaurants and event spaces, all Chen properties, all featuring stunning but somehow soulless floral displays. At precisely 2 p.m., Leo entered Vivian's office for the first time. Unlike the conference room's calculated impressiveness, her private space surprised him. One wall displayed black and white photographs of gardens from around the world. A small bonsai tree sat near her computer, perfectly maintained. Your arrangements have been noticed, Vivian said, gesturing for him to sit. Our Singapore investors specifically mentioned them in their follow-up. Leo nodded. I'm glad they made an impression. Not just on them. Vivian leaned forward. I want to offer Petal Poetry an exclusive contract to provide arrangements for all Chen Hotel properties. Leo blinked. All of them? You have 28 locations currently, with 4 more opening next year, Vivian finished. Each requiring daily arrangements for lobbies, restaurants, event spaces, and VIP suites. She slid a document across the desk. The proposed annual figure made Leo's breath catch. This would solve. He stopped himself from saying all my financial problems. Your bank situation, Vivian completed matter-of-factly. Yes, I imagine it would. You researched me. I research all potential partners. No apology in her tone. Your creativity is exceptional. Your business management is not." Leo should have felt offended, but her directness was refreshing. What exactly would this partnership entail? For the next hour they discussed details. Vivian wanted consistency across all properties' recognizable Chen Hotel arrangements. Leo pushed for creative freedom and local sourcing. They went back and forth, neither giving ground easily. "Your hotels each have distinct personalities," Leo argued. "The flowers should reflect that, not be standardized products." "My brand requires recognition," Vivian countered. "A guest in Singapore should feel the same connection as one in New York." Leo pulled out his sketchbook. "What if we created a signature style but adapted it to each location? Same language, different dialects." Vivian studied his quick sketches. For the first time, Leo saw her considering someone else's vision alongside her own. "Show me," she finally said. 3 days later, they signed the contract in the private dining room of Chen's flagship hotel. Instead of the usual corporate celebration, Vivian had arranged something smaller, just Leo, herself, Rebecca, and Zoe. "To new partnerships," Vivian said, raising a glass of champagne. As they dined, Leo noticed subtle changes in Vivian. She laughed at Zoe's jokes. She asked questions about their backgrounds. When dessert arrived, a delicate flower-shaped pastry, she mentioned her grandmother again. "She would have liked you," Vivian told Leo quietly while the others discussed implementation details. She believed flowers had souls. "What do you believe?" Leo asked. Before she could answer, the hotel manager appeared, ready to give Leo his tour. The flagship hotel was a masterpiece of design classic architecture with modern touches. As they walked through grand spaces, Leo mentally placed his creations in each area, imagining how they would enhance the guest experience. In the penthouse suite, he stopped by the windows overlooking the city. "The light here at sunset must be incredible." "It is," Vivian said. She had dismissed the manager earlier, choosing to complete the tour herself. "I stayed here for 3 months while my home was being renovated." "Not what I pictured for you," Leo admitted. "What did you picture?" "Something less accessible. A fortress on a hill, perhaps." She smiled faintly. Sometimes the best hiding places are in plain sight. They ended up in the hotel's design office past midnight, spreading sketches across a large table. Vivian had removed her blazer. Leo had rolled up his sleeves. Their hands occasionally brushed as they arranged sample photos. "This for Boston," Leo said, placing a concept sketch, "and this for the Dubai opening." He looked up to find Vivian watching him, not the designs. Something electric passed between them, a moment of recognition beyond professional appreciation. Vivian cleared her throat and stepped back. "We should continue tomorrow." The next morning, Rebecca delivered coffee to Vivian's office, finding her already reviewing Leo's sketches. "The board is impressed with the partnership," Rebecca said. "They think it's a brilliant business strategy." "It is," Vivian replied, not looking up. Rebecca placed the coffee down carefully. "I've worked for you for 7 years. This is the first time I've seen you look at financial reports and smile." Vivian finally met her assistant's knowing gaze. "It's a good contract." "It's not the contract you're smiling about," Rebecca said softly, before tactfully withdrawing. Alone, Vivian touched a dried white rose petal she'd kept inside her planner. The boundary between business and something more personal was beginning to blur, and for once she wasn't immediately rebuilding the wall. 3 months into the Chen Hotel's contract, petal poetry hardly resembled the struggling shop Leo had nearly lost. 2 new employees managed daily orders while Zoe supervised local deliveries. The back room, once cramped with buckets and supplies, now housed a design studio where Leo created concepts for each hotel property. "I never thought I'd say this," Zoe remarked one morning watching Leo review international flower shipments on a tablet. "But we might need a bigger space." Leo looked around at the organized chaos. "As long as it still feels like us. I don't want some sterile corporate studio," says the man who just ordered $10,000 of black dahlias for the Milan opening. "The dahlias were Vivian's idea," Leo corrected, though he couldn't help smiling at the memory of their debate over the dramatic flowers. These days, his calendar was filled with meetings at Chen Tower, design reviews, and video calls with hotel managers worldwide. But between professional obligations, something else was growing, moments that had nothing to do with business. Like Vivian texting him photos of unusual flowering plants spotted during her travels. Or Leo saving the last perfect peony of the season because its exact shade of pink had made Vivian pause during a presentation. They maintained professional boundaries in public, but their conversations increasingly strayed into personal territory. Leo learned about Vivian's childhood in her grandmother's garden. Vivian discovered Leo's dream of creating botanical installations that told stories through living plants. One rainy Thursday, they visited a specialized nursery outside the city, searching for rare varieties for the Tokyo renovation. Among greenhouse rows of exotic blooms, they wandered in comfortable silence. "My board thinks I'm being excessive," Vivian admitted, examining a blue moon wisteria. "Flying across the country to select flowers personally." "Are you?" Leo asked. Their eyes met briefly before both looked away. "Probably." She touched a cascading violet blossom. "But I've spent my career making sensible decisions. Perhaps I'm allowed occasional impracticality." "Is that what I am?" Leo's question hung in the humid air. "An impractical decision?" Vivian studied him, her usual corporate mask slipping. "You're the first person in years who sees me, not my company or my bank account." Her voice grew softer. "The first person I've wanted to see me." Before Leo could respond, the nursery owner approached with documents about their selections. The moment passed, but something fundamental had shifted. 2 weeks later, Vivian invited Leo to her home to discuss the Jakarta property opening. He expected another sleek penthouse, but instead found himself at a secluded estate where modern architecture blended with extensive gardens. "My grandmother's influence," Vivian explained, leading him through French doors. "After she died, I built this." They stepped into a glass conservatory filled with rare plants and blooming flowers from around the world. Unlike the pristine public spaces Vivian typically inhabited, this greenhouse felt lived in and deeply personal. Scientific labels mixed with handwritten notes. Pruning shears lay beside luxury gardening gloves. "No one knows about this place," she said quietly. "It doesn't fit the image." "Why show me?" Leo asked. "Because you'd understand." She touched an orchid gently. "These plants have been with me through acquisitions and expansions, failures and successes. They don't care about quarterly projections." Leo moved closer. "What do they care about?" "Attention, patience." Her eyes met his. "Honesty." Later, neither could say who moved first. One moment they stood surrounded by rare blossoms. The next they were kissing among the orchids, years of isolation and longing dissolving in an instant of connection. When they finally broke apart, Vivian's composed exterior had vanished completely. She looked younger, almost vulnerable. "This complicates things," she whispered. Leo tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Beautiful things usually do." They spent hours in the greenhouse, talking and planning and occasionally kissing again, until stars appeared through the glass ceiling. When Leo finally left, they agreed to proceed carefully, their professional partnership too important to risk with impulsive decisions. But caution came too late. The next morning, Leo's phone exploded with notifications. Zoe called him into the back office, her expression grave. "Business Insider," she said, turning her computer screen toward him. There, on the financial news homepage, Chen Hotel's CEO's secret garden rendezvous with flower vendor. Below it, a telephoto lens had captured their kiss through the greenhouse glass. Leo sank into a chair. How did they even find that place? His phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "The board has called an emergency meeting," she said without preamble. "They're questioning Vivian's judgment regarding the floral contract. They're suggesting impropriety in the bidding process." Across town, Vivian stood before her board members, their faces ranging from concerned to openly hostile. "This relationship clearly predates the contract signing," Warren said, tapping the tabloid. "The appearance of favoritism is misleading," Vivian finished firmly. Meanwhile, Leo's newly hired employees whispered in the front room. Outside, a reporter waited hopefully for comment. His phone showed 3 missed calls from his bank manager, suddenly interested in his connection to the Chen fortune. In one morning, their carefully cultivated worlds had collided, and neither knew if anything would survive intact. The Chen Hotel's boardroom, usually a place of strategic calm, crackled with tension. Warren paced before the windows, while other members watched Vivian with expressions ranging from disappointment to calculation. "This isn't about your personal life," Warren insisted. "It's about the appearance of impropriety. $100 million contract awarded to a previously unknown vendor with whom you're now romantically involved." Vivian remained perfectly still, her posture impeccable. "The contract was vetted by legal and approved unanimously by this very board. The timeline is clear. The timeline suggests a personal connection that predates the business arrangement," another board member said. "The optics are problematic, especially with the Jakarta investors arriving next week." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Vivian asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Warren exchanged glances with the others before continuing. "The board recommends a cooling-off period. Distance yourself from the vendor." "His name is Leo," Vivian interrupted. "From Mr. Winters," Warren corrected smoothly. "Until the Jakarta deal closes. And perhaps consider diversifying our floral services moving forward." Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "Need to talk. Important." Across town, Leo sat across from a woman in an expensive suit who radiated corporate efficiency. "Bloomfield Hotels has locations in 35 countries, she explained. "We've admired your work with Chen Properties and believe you could bring that same aesthetic to our brand, with significantly more creative freedom." Leo studied the proposal before him. The offer exceeded his Chen contract by nearly 30%. "There's just one condition," the woman added. "Exclusivity. We can't have our signature look appearing in competing properties." "You want me to end my contract with Chen Hotels?" Leo said flatly. "We want to offer your talents the platform they deserve," she corrected with a practiced smile. "Without the complications of your current arrangement." Leo's phone buzzed. Vivian calling. He silenced it. "I'll need time to consider," he told the Bloomfield representative. The rooftop garden of Chen Tower provided privacy, but no peace. Leo paced while Vivian stood motionless by the railing. The city sprawled below them. "It's a better offer financially," Leo explained, "and without the scrutiny. No one questioning my qualifications or suggesting I only got the job because of me," Vivian finished. "So you're considering it." "Wouldn't you? Your board is pressuring you to drop me anyway." Vivian's eyes flashed. "I don't make decisions based on pressure." "No? Then why have you barely spoken to me since the photo leaked? Why am I suddenly meeting with procurement instead of you directly?" "Because I'm trying to protect what we built." Vivian rarely raised her voice, but now it echoed across the garden. "Do you have any idea what it takes to maintain authority in my position? The constant scrutiny. One perceived mistake and decades of work become irrelevant." Leo stepped closer. "Is that what I am? A mistake?" "That's not what I said." "Then what am I to you, Vivian? A vendor? A boyfriend? A complication?" The painful question hung between them. Vivian's phone buzzed insistently. "I have to take this," she said, turning away. "The Jakarta team—" "Always something more important," Leo muttered. "This is my company," Vivian snapped. "Of course it's important." "And what we have isn't?" Their eyes locked in mutual frustration. Two people from different worlds, suddenly remembering all the reasons those worlds rarely intersected. "I need to prepare for the board," Vivian finally said, professional mask sliding back into place. "Take the Bloomfield offer if you want. I won't hold you to our contract." The next morning, Leo arrived unannounced at Chen Tower for a final meeting with procurement. Passing the boardroom, he heard Vivian's voice through the partially open door. "This situation is a temporary distraction," she was saying. "The vendor relationship is purely professional and always has been. His designs work for our brand, nothing more. If his services no longer benefit Chen Hotels, we'll find alternatives." Leo froze, the words hitting like physical blows. Just a vendor, nothing more. He turned to leave and found Rebecca watching him, her expression sympathetic. She clearly knew he'd overheard. "She doesn't mean it," Rebecca said quietly. "When the board challenges her, she becomes whoever she needs to be." "That's the problem," Leo replied. "I'm interested in who she actually is." 3 days later, Vivian's private jet departed for a 2-week international tour of Chen properties, culminating with the Jakarta opening. She left without resolving things with Leo, sending only a formal email outlining transition plans should he choose to terminate their contract. Leo threw himself into work, telling no one about the Bloomfield offer except Zoe. "You're an idiot if you take it just because you're hurt," Zoe told him bluntly. "I'm not hurt," Leo lied. "I'm being practical." A week into Vivian's absence, Rebecca called, requesting Leo inspect the arrangements for an unexpected VIP at the flagship hotel. When he arrived, she instead led him to Vivian's private office. "You shouldn't be showing me this," Leo said, uncomfortable in the intimate space. "She'd fire me if she knew," Rebecca agreed, "but you should see something before you make your decision." She opened a drawer in Vivian's desk and removed a small wooden box. Inside, perfectly preserved, lay every note Leo had written to accompany his flower arrangements. Dozens of them, some with dried petals still attached. "She reads them when she thinks no one's watching," Rebecca said softly. "I've never seen her keep anything personal before, ever." Leo picked up one card, recognizing his handwriting. violets for faithfulness, even when the world stands between. He closed the box carefully, uncertain what to do with this glimpse into Vivian's guarded heart. Leo sat alone in his design studio long after everyone had left. The Bloomfield contract lay unsigned on his desk, offering everything he'd once wanted: financial security, creative recognition, expansion opportunities. Yet as he stared at the signature line, he felt nothing. His phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Vivian returns, Jakarta deal final ceremony. 3 days from now, she would land briefly before heading to the official signing. According to Rebecca's updates, the deal had expanded to include 2 additional properties, making it the largest in Chen Hotel's history. Leo picked up the wooden box Rebecca had shown him. Vivian had left it with strict instructions to deliver it to him if she didn't return. Inside, beyond his notes, he'd discovered pressed flowers from each arrangement he'd ever made her. "What good is success," he whispered to the empty room, "if you can't share it with someone who understands why it matters?" He pulled out his sketchbook and began drawing rapidly, not hotel arrangements or commercial designs, but something entirely new. A story told in flowers, their story, from white roses to blue orchids and everything between. At midnight he called Zoe. "I need your help with something impossible," he said. "Finally," she replied. "I was wondering when you'd stop moping." By morning, he had contacted Rebecca with a plan so audacious she initially refused. "She'll fire me," she insisted. "Possibly," Leo agreed, "but you're the only one who can help." The next call was harder. Leo stared at his phone for 20 minutes before dialing his doctor. "I need something for flight anxiety," he explained. "Emergency situation." Leo had never flown, not once. The mere thought of being suspended thousands of feet above Earth paralyzed him with terror. But Vivian's jet would land only briefly before departing again for the Jakarta ceremony, and he needed to be there. For 2 days straight, Leo worked without sleep, sourcing specific flowers from suppliers worldwide. Each bloom represented a moment in their relationship: white roses for beginnings, forget-me-nots for their first real conversation, black dahlias from their Milan debate, orchids from her greenhouse. When Rebecca texted the final timing details, Leo's hands trembled, partly from exhaustion, partly from fear of what he was about to do. "Wheels down in 5 hours," her message read. "Are you sure about this?" He wasn't, not remotely, but he replied yes. Vivian's international tour had been a triumph professionally. The Jakarta investors had committed to an expanded partnership, impressed by her vision and commanding presence. Yet each night, alone in luxury suites, she found herself staring at her phone, finger hovering over Leo's contact. Pride and fear kept her from calling. Each day without contact made the next call harder to imagine. As her jet prepared for its brief homeland touchdown before continuing to the Jakarta signing ceremony, Vivian reviewed her notes mechanically. The board would be pleased. Shareholders would celebrate. Another perfect business transaction. She felt nothing. "We'll be on the ground for 90 minutes, the pilot informed her. "Just enough time to refuel and change crews." Vivian nodded absently. From her briefcase she removed the single dried white rose petal she still carried. Everywhere. The last tangible connection to something that felt real in her carefully constructed world. When her jet landed, Vivian gathered her things efficiently. The door opened, stairs descended, and she prepared for the usual efficient transition. Instead, she froze at the cabin entrance. The entire private terminal had been transformed into a garden. Hundreds of flowers created a path from her plane to a central arrangement so massive it seemed impossible, a living sculpture that contained every flower that had ever passed between them. And standing beside it, visibly terrified but absolutely determined, was Leo. "What is this?" she asked, descending slowly. "This is me facing my greatest fear," Leo replied, his voice unsteady. "Both flying and losing you." "You hate flying?" "I do, but I love you more than I fear anything else." The word hung between them, love finally spoken aloud. Leo gestured to the arrangement. "Every flower tells part of our story. White roses where we began." He pointed to different sections. "Blue forget-me-nots from the first notes. Black dahlias we argued about for Milan. The orchids from your greenhouse." Vivian touched a delicate bloom. "You remembered all of them." "I remember everything about you," Leo said simply. "The CEO everyone sees, and the woman who keeps handwritten notes in a wooden box." Her eyes widened. "Rebecca showed you?" "She thought I should know who I was really walking away from." Vivian glanced toward where her board members would soon arrive for the next leg of the journey. "My life is complicated." "I know." Leo took her hand. "I'm not asking you to choose between your company and me. I'm asking if we can find a way to have both your success and something real between us." "The board already approved my proposal," Rebecca interrupted, appearing beside them. She handed Vivian a folder. "A new corporate structure for Petal Poetry as an independent design firm that services Chen hotels but maintains creative autonomy. Leo keeps his artistic integrity. You keep your vendor at an appropriate professional distance and after hours." She smiled. "That's no one's business but yours." Vivian opened the folder, quickly scanning the document. "You did all this?" "I had help," Leo admitted. "Turns out your assistant is as formidable as you are." "Before you decide," Leo continued, "there's one more flower you should see." He reached into the center of the arrangement and carefully extracted a single bloom, a rare midnight blue rose surrounded by tiny stars of jasmine. "This represents what comes next, if you want it." "And what's that?" Vivian asked softly. "Something impossible made possible," Leo answered. "Like a CEO and a florist finding a way forward together." For the first time in weeks, Vivian's smile reached her eyes. She reached for the rose, her fingers brushing his. "I've built my career making impossible things happen. Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Vivian pulled him close and kissed him, not caring who saw. Above them, the departing flight attendant adjusted the fresh white roses, now adorning the jet's cabin. Leo's final touch for their journey forward. "Remember that single white rose with a handwritten note? The one from our first scene? Now you know it wasn't just any flower. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. A CEO whose world was built on calculation and a florist who spoke through petals, finding that sometimes the most meaningful things require no words at all.